Hey, welcome back. I'm Juniper-Quinn, and this is One Big Darkroom. We will be through the holidays by the time you're listening to this, and I've been sitting with what they meant for me this year. Thanksgiving was exactly what I needed. Quiet, grounding, a reset in nature after a long, emotionally heavy season of my life. The pups had the time of their lives, running wild on the property, exploring every corner. Christmas went better than I expected too. I actually let go. I let go of the heaviness. I let go of the trauma that's been so tightly woven into this time of year for me. I let myself enjoy it. And that on its own was a massive step. What surprised me most was the anxiety I felt while preparing for my trip. Not because I was scared, but because I actually felt safe. For so long, leaving home meant escaping danger, not going on vacation. This was the first time I wasn't running away from something, and that brought guilt. Why should I treat myself if I feel okay? Do I really deserve this? The answer, of course, is yes. And giving myself permission to believe that, to actually live that, was huge. Since this was the first time in a long time that I felt even a flicker of a Christmas spirit, I leaned all the way into it. I made my crab leg dinner and ate it while on FaceTime with a friend. I did my 13 wishes ritual. And for the first time, maybe ever, I watched multiple Christmas movies back to back. I spent quality time with the pups, saw friends, had some incredible dinners, and the weather was absolutely perfect. 75 degrees on Christmas. No rain, just sun, warmth, and relief. The first morning, I stepped outside and breathed in the sea air and smiled. It was everything I wanted it to be, and it was a huge step in my healing journey. When I left you in the Soul Dogs episode, we talked about loss, real loss, the kind that rearranges the shape of your life. Losing Nala and Shotgun was like losing the compass points on my internal map. They were the witness to every version of me I've ever been. They were steady, grounding, and unconditional in a way that makes you feel like you've actually got a place in this world. And when they were gone, it was like somebody had taken the floorboards out from under me. And I didn't really have time to rebuild anything before the next crack happened. Because then I lost my grandmother. My grandmother was one of the foundational women in my life. After my parents' divorce, she stepped in, not as a replacement, but as this steady, warm, deeply present force. She showed up. She cooked. She listened. She made the world feel steadier than it actually was. And she got sick quickly, suddenly, and she passed right before Christmas. Christmas was her holiday. And when I say that, I mean she did Christmas. Her house looked like a magazine. Every corner decorated, every ornament chosen with intention. She made the holiday magical in this way you don't appreciate until you're older and realize not everyone grows up with that kind of attention to detail. Every time I hear an old Christmas song, the ones that sound a little dusty, a little vintage, I think of her. It's like they still carry her frequency. Losing her after losing my two soul dogs, it felt like the universe reaching for those golden scissors, the ones the fates used to cut your thread in Greek mythology. It felt like my cord was right there, tight, fraying, and those were the moments where it felt like it could just snap. 3 of the hardest deaths of my life, all inside a few months. And people around me asking, "Are you excited for Christmas?" And I remember thinking, how could I be excited for Christmas with all of this loss? When we talked in the previous episode about how loss changes the way you make decisions, this is what I meant. Grief shifts your center of gravity. It changes what you reach for. It changes what feels safe or familiar. And when you're navigating trauma, sometimes you make choices from a place that isn't rooted, because how could it be? I was in that space, raw, unsteady, moving through life in survival mode. And right before all the losses hit, I was preparing a second run of Rocky Horror. If you've ever worked on something with a cast, you know there's always last-minute changes, people dropping out, roles needing to be filled, schedules shifting. It was a lot to juggle at the time. One of the people who stepped into a role this season was someone I went on to briefly date. Our breakup wasn't easy, and it was an added stressor to everything happening. During this time, I was filled with grief, overwhelm, and emotional exhaustion. All of it layered on top of each other in such a short span of time. And that's where the next part of the story begins. Before we go any further, I want to offer a heads up. This next section of the episode includes descriptions of violence, fear, trauma responses, and experiences that may be distressing for some listeners. If you need to pause, skip, or come back later, I fully support that. In that darkness that had become my life, the holidays were inching closer. I wasn't excited. I wasn't even present. I was surviving, barely. I prepared for Christmas in the most minimal ways. Not because I felt festive, but because it felt like something you're supposed to do. The motions, not the meaning. Right before Christmas Eve, the temperature dropped sharply. Everything froze, the kind of freeze that doesn't feel normal for my state. Every surface covered in ice. The air cut through my lungs. I was stuck at home, so I went to bed early. I had no idea what was coming. In the middle of the night, I was violently jolted awake by a sound I couldn't explain. It wasn't a thud, it sounded like an explosion. My sleep mask flew off as I leapt out of bed. My whole body was shaking. I didn't know why. I didn't know what the sound was, but my nervous system seemed to know before my brain did. The sound came from my living room. I took a step toward it, then froze. Something in me said, "Don't go out there." So I did the only thing I could think to do. I called my dad. It was the middle of the night, but he answered. I told him something had happened, that I didn't understand what it was, and asked him to stay on the phone with me. My first thought was that something had exploded from the cold. A pipe, maybe, something mechanical, something logical. I stepped into the living room and scanned the space. At first, nothing looked wrong. And then everything did. There was dust on my couch, dust on my desk, dust floating in the air. But nothing was wet. Nothing looked like it had burst. My brain could not make sense of it. Then I saw it. A hole in the wall. Then another. My voice cracked as I said to my dad, "I think someone shot into my living room." He went quiet for a second and then said, "If you think that's what happened, you need to call 911 now." When the dispatcher answered and asked what the emergency was, I could barely get the words out. "I think someone just shot into my living room." She asked for my address and then told me that the neighbor had already reported shots fired. An officer was nearby. She asked me to stay calm and stay on the phone with her. A few minutes later, an officer knocked at my door. Her eyes widened when I opened it. She asked what had happened, and I told her exactly what I saw. We pulled up the blinds, and there they were. Clean, sharp bullet holes through the glass, letting in the frigid air. I stared at them, trying to make the world make sense, and it just didn't. And then something even worse registered, the trajectory. The bullets had entered the wall right above my couch. My couch, the place where I rested, where I decompressed, where I tried to feel human again. The place where, when the dogs were alive, we spent almost every moment together, curled up, stacked on each other. It was one of the safest places in my home. It was sacred. Seeing those holes sitting inches above the spot where my dogs used to lay their heads, where I used to sit with them every night, it deconstructed something in me. It wasn't just damage to a wall. It was damage to a memory, to a ritual, to a place in my home that had held so much softness and so much love. And now it held something else entirely. Coming back to that moment of seeing the entry of the bullets, the officer told me gently, "I know this is going to be difficult, but I need you to sit down and try to stay calm while we get more officers here." One by one, they arrived. Some offered to wait outside, but it was way too cold. I asked them to stay in. The original officer said they were calling a detective. While we waited, one officer tried to lighten the moment and joked, "What, you have a crazy ex or something?" I said, "Who doesn't have a crazy ex?" We all laughed. Someone else suggested it could have been the wrong address or an initiation or any number of explanations. I couldn't even process that. I noticed a couple of officers standing at the door, quietly giggling at something, and I couldn't imagine what in the world could be funny in a moment like this. Then the detective stepped inside, and I understood. To bring a moment of levity into an otherwise terrifying story, one of the most beautiful men I've ever seen in my life walked into my frozen, bullet-damaged living room. While I was standing there in pajamas, covered in dogs wearing Santa hats. My pink hair was all over the place. I probably looked like I had been dragged through the underworld. And there he was, calm, professional, and inexplicably attractive. Reality snapped back quickly, though. He asked me a few questions, handed me his card, and the officers finished searching for rounds. They didn't find anything inside. Once they had gathered what they needed, everyone slowly filtered out, except for the original officer. She stayed with me a moment longer. I looked at her and said, "I don't feel safe. What do I do?" She told me that despite how it felt, staying put was the safest option because the roads were dangerously frozen. She said she'd finish her paperwork sitting outside my home so I wouldn't be alone, and I'll never forget the gratitude I felt for that. When she went outside, I cut up cardboard boxes and taped them over my windows to block the cold air from coming through the bullet holes. It was surreal. Standing there with packing tape and cardboard, repairing something I couldn't emotionally process. I vacuumed the glass off the couch, brushed drywall off every surface, tried to make the room look normal. It wasn't. After she left, the silence was too much. I didn't want to be near the windows, not for another second. So I stripped the blankets from my bed and made a little pallet in my closet. The one place in the house that felt solid, protected, like nothing could come through the walls there. It was where I went for tornadoes. I sat in that closet all night, crying, in shock, staring at the wall because my body couldn't do anything else. When morning finally came, I grabbed only the essentials, trembling the whole time, and got out of that house as fast as I could. That was the night everything changed. And sometimes life places something normal, something familiar, right in the middle of something horrific, like the universe giving you a small lifeline. My best friend was in town. I already had plans to meet her and her husband for coffee long before any of this happened. So I drove there, not because I felt okay, but because I needed something normal to hold on to. When I walked in and we talked about what had happened, her husband made a joke, a lighthearted, slightly out-of-pocket joke, about how I was now the toughest person he knew. He definitely used another word for tough, but I'm trying to keep it clean. And then I laughed, because sometimes humor is the only thing we have. Sometimes the only way to move through a moment like that is to let the absurdity of it have its space. But after we had our coffee and our laughs, leaving them was hard. The moment I stepped out of that coffee shop, the silence returned, the fear returned, and the numbness returned. I got into my car and made a phone call that becomes important later in this story. I will come back to that at a later date. What matters is that I hung up and suddenly found myself sitting in a parking lot of a furniture store, staring ahead, completely frozen. I had no idea what to do next. I had to figure out where I was going to spend Christmas. That's when the story loops back to what I shared in an earlier episode, how a friend I love opened her home to me on Christmas Eve without hesitation, without question, without needing details. She said, "Stay here, you're safe." But even with that lifeline, I wasn't okay. If I thought I was in survival mode before, this was something altogether different. This was survival mixed with fear, survival mixed with the unknown, survival mixed with questions I didn't have answers to. Who did this? Are they following me? Was I targeted? Is my family in danger? Would I be putting someone else at risk if I stayed with them? My brain was trying to solve a puzzle with no pieces. Every direction felt unsafe. Every possibility felt too big. And underneath all of it was this new, terrifying numbness. The kind that doesn't shut you down but keeps you hyper aware of everything all at once. That was the place I found myself in, sitting in that parking lot, not knowing where to go or how to start rebuilding any sense of safety. In the days that followed, life stopped making sense in any recognizable way. I couldn't stay at my house. Every cell in my body rejected the idea of being there, but everything I owned was inside of it. Hell, I owned the house itself. So I kept making these small, careful trips back and forth, just long enough to grab clothes, toiletries, anything essential, just long enough to get in and get out. It was the strangest feeling, being completely displaced inside your own life. I didn't know where I was supposed to go. I didn't know where I was supposed to sleep. I didn't know what I was supposed to do about the house or the windows or the repairs or the simple fact that it no longer felt like home. Every time I walked through the door, my mind replayed the what ifs. What if I had been sitting on the couch? What if I had been awake? What if the angle had been different? What if... It was like my brain kept trying to bargain with the universe for a different version of reality. A version where none of this had happened. A version where everything was still intact. I had more conversations with the detective. Just basic follow-ups. Nothing dramatic or revealing. Standard questions. Procedural things. And at one point, he asked the question that detectives are required to ask in situations like this. Is there anyone in your life who might hold ill will toward you? I remember almost laughing. Not because it was funny, but because the idea felt so absurd to me. I said no, of course not. I'm not perfect, but I try very hard to treat people with care. I go out of my way to avoid hurting anyone, ever. The thought that someone I knew could do something violent or malicious, it didn't even register as a possibility in my brain. At that point, the only explanation that made any sense at all was that someone had the wrong house. A mistake. A misidentification. Something random that had nothing to do with me as a person. Because the alternative, the idea that this was personal, that was too big, too heavy, and too far outside the reality I believed I lived in. So I didn't think it. I didn't go there. I couldn't. I was just trying to survive being a person without a place to land. 2 weeks passed. Time had become something that didn't make sense anymore. It bent, it folded in on itself, it stretched out endlessly, and I was just going through the motions, trying to pretend my life still had a structure. I had worked into my schedule another trip back to the house. I needed more of my things, and even though I didn't feel safe there, it was still my home. Everything I owned was still inside. And here's one of those things I realized when I look back. I went alone. I drove out there completely by myself, which shows just how disconnected I was from the possible reality of what was happening. I wasn't thinking in terms of danger. I wasn't thinking in terms of patterns. I was thinking in terms of errands, tasks, lists. When I walked in, something felt wrong. A stillness that didn't match the room. Instinctively, I walked towards the windows. The blinds were broken. Again, my brain stalled. It's incredible how the mind will protect you from truth until it absolutely can't. I stood there trying to make sense of the bent slats and strange angles. And then, shaking, I reached up and pulled the blinds back. There it was. Proof. It had happened again. And this is the part where I just have to say it because there's no other way to capture the shock. What the fuck? One time was unbelievable, traumatic, life-altering. But twice meant something else entirely. Twice meant this wasn't random. Twice meant I was now living inside a pattern. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and called 911 again. Dispatch asked where I was and told me to take cover in my car. I told her my car was in the garage, and she said that was fine. Just get in and lock the doors and stay there. So I did exactly what she said. An officer arrived shortly after. When I explained what happened, his response was flat, detached, like he wished he'd been anywhere else. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't offer reassurance. He didn't search thoroughly. He wrote down an incident number, told me nothing else, and left. No support, no acknowledgement of what it means for someone to walk into their home and see evidence of violence pointed at them for the second time in 14 days. So again, I gathered what I needed as quickly as I could and left. Now everything in my mind was spinning. Twice? Why twice? What does this mean? What in the hell is going on? At this point, my ex-husband, who lived nearby and had been helping with logistical things, stepped in and helped me install a camera on the house. It had happened twice. What was stopping it from happening a third time? I hated that thought, but it was the truth. And installing a camera that records 24/7 is not easy. It took time, tools, trial and error, but we got it done. It's something I knew even then I would talk about one day on this podcast. How everyone who can manage it should have a camera on their home, at least one. After that, the weeks felt like moving through fog. I was waiting, praying for nothing to happen, and at the same time preparing myself for the possibility that it could, all while trying to plan something normal, something human. My birthday. Holidays might not be my thing, but birthdays are. I've always been a big birthday person, mine and everyone else's. Birthdays are the one time of year where I let myself want things, where I let myself celebrate without guilt. That's something I'm still learning to allow in other parts of my life, but birthdays have always been sacred. For my 30th, I took 4 of my closest friends and my boyfriend at the time to Ireland. That's the kind of birthday person I am. I go big, and I make it matter. But this birthday was all wrong. I could live without Christmas. I could skip New Year's. I already had enough emotional history wrapped around those days. But my birthday is different. And that year I remembered thinking, how can I be excited for something when I'm not even sure I want to be alive for it? Thankfully, my best friend, the same one who met me for coffee the morning after the first shooting, came through in the biggest way. She flew in, scooped me up, and took me to an Airbnb where I could feel hidden, sheltered. No one knew where we were. She planned drinks, dinner, dessert, all of my favorite little luxuries. She gave me the gift of presence, of safety, of not being alone. But between planning that celebration and actually reaching it, the unimaginable happened. Before the in-town birthday plans, I planned a trip to Arizona, a real escape, something just for me, for peace, for breathing room. My ex-husband joined me for a part of it, a last-minute addition. We went to the Grand Canyon. Everything was frozen over, the paths slick with ice. I remember thinking I'd slip and slide all the way down the canyon. They really do need more barriers there. He left earlier than I did, only staying 2 days. During my trip, I had a friend in town that I asked to check on the house a few times. She was one of my friends during this time that got me to the other side. I texted her to ask her to swing by, and then I got the call I had been dreading. It had happened again. What do they say? Third time's a charm. I don't know what that phrase means in this context, but I can tell you what it did mean. It snapped something inside me, because now there was a camera. There was footage. So much for enjoying my vacation. My ex-husband stayed up all night going through every minute of the recording, and for that I will forever be grateful. Early in the morning, he texted, "I found it." My breath stopped. The clip came through on my phone. I stared at the screen, holding it with cold hands. What was I about to see? Would I recognize the car? Would I understand anything about why this was happening? How traumatizing was it going to be to actually watch it? I gathered every ounce of courage I had, and I pressed play. It was nighttime, quiet. A car rolled by, then again. Then a sharp, violent pop blasted through my speakers. There it was, the sound that had blown my life open. I paused the video. The vehicle filled my screen, and in that moment, my entire body froze. My heart stopped. Everything inside me went silent. I felt like I knew whose vehicle that was. I didn't want to. I tried every possible explanation to talk myself out of it. I told myself I was wrong. But beneath all the rationalizing, all the mental gymnastics, all the desperate bargaining, I knew what I knew. My body knew it before my mind was willing to accept it. And that's where everything shifted. After I saw the footage, after my entire system froze in recognition, I knew I had to call the detective. I didn't want to. I didn't want any of this, but I needed to talk to him. When he answered, I told him I had a possible suspect. Even saying the word suspect felt surreal, like it didn't belong in my vocabulary. This was days before my birthday. The days that followed felt like I had suddenly stepped into the script of a crime drama, except it was my life. I was uncovering information, piecing things together, giving the detective anything I could that might help. Every day felt like a new wave of details, a new conversation, a new layer of fear. So when my birthday celebration finally happened, the safe Airbnb, my best friend by my side, the dinner and drinks she had planned, it all felt muted, like life had a dimmer switch. At one point during the night, I was sitting in the Airbnb on an important call with my best friend beside me, thinking, how is this what I'm doing on my birthday? How is this even my life right now? A few days after my birthday, an arrest was made in connection with the case. You would think that would have brought relief, closure, something, anything. But if I haven't made it clear by now, the system is a failure. This person was released within hours. And immediately, new fears flooded in. Now they know that I know. Am I in more danger? What happens now? There were bond conditions, no contact with me, no possession of firearms, among other restrictions. On paper, those should have made me feel safer. Somehow, they didn't. I told myself, at least there was an arrest. At least the incidents will stop now. That was the only thing I had to hold on to. For a few weeks, things were quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. During this time, I was trying to sell my house. Do you know how impossible it is to sell a home with bullet holes in the windows? Even that, wow. The stress was unimaginable. I was repairing things, negotiating, explaining, waiting. Eventually, I got a contract. We were in final negotiations. Inspections were coming up. I had people checking on the house just in case. And then another call. My ex-husband. Again. This time, it didn't look like a bullet. This time, it was a rock. A rock? Really? How and why would someone do this? What was happening? And how much more could I take? Through further conversation and informal assessment, it was said to have most likely been propelled by a slingshot. I'm just going to take a second of silence to honor how absurdly ridiculous that is. Okay. Now we were at 4 incidents. 4. And I was on the verge of losing the buyer for my house because my window had been broken yet again. The inspection was coming up. The timeline was tight. Everything was fragile. My body couldn't bear the stress anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do if the sale fell through. I was paying a mortgage on a home I couldn't live in, and the idea of being financially trapped in that place was almost as suffocating as everything else. I was running out of time, money, and emotional capacity all at once. I wouldn't let myself celebrate until I was physically sitting in that office, pen in hand, signing the paperwork. And when it was done, when it was officially no longer my house, I walked out to the car, closed the door, and cried. Tears of relief, tears of release, the first breath I think I had taken in months. I did it. I got through the only physical thing still tying me to that nightmare, that house. It was no longer mine. No longer something that could haunt me every time I drove past it in my mind. And this is where I'm going to stop this episode. Because as you already know, I am still in the legal process. I'm still navigating what this did to me, how it rewired me, how it reshaped my sense of safety, how it changed my life in ways I am still uncovering. I'm telling the story because people need to know that things like this don't just happen on television. They happen in real life, and they happen to women all the time. I am living, thankfully, to talk about it. But my experience is also proof of how massively flawed this system is. What if I had been sitting on the couch that first night? What if I had been home the other 2 times bullets entered my living room? Why wasn't more done to prevent repeated incidents? My life completely shifted because of these ongoing incidents. And yet, here I am, 3 years later, still waiting. I'm recording this on New Year's Eve, and that feels important, intentional. Like I'm closing a door on a chapter that has followed me for far too long. So I'm leaving this here in 2025, ritualistically. I know I'll have to revisit parts of it when I go to court, but even then, this story does not define me. It reveals me. It shows my resilience, my endurance, and my capacity to keep moving when everything around me was trying to break me. Yes, I was the victim in this story, but I am not the victim in my life. I'm done letting circumstances define me. I'm done feeling powerless. This year, I take back my own power, fully and unapologetically. Now, I've left out a lot of details, layers, and intricacies, and I did that intentionally. But I will be coming back to all of it after the court process is over. For now, I'm telling the parts that feel safe to share, grounded in my experience, and mindful of the legal reality I'm still navigating. And speaking of that reality, the next court date is set for late May. By then, we'll be approaching 4 years since the night this all began. So if you've ever wondered whether the system moves slowly or whether it actually supports the people who need it, well, you're seeing it unfold in real time through me. It's a process. A long, imperfect, unbelievably heavy process. And yet, here I am. Still healing, still rebuilding, still moving forward. Thank you for walking through this with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for holding space while I spoke words I've never spoken out loud before. This chapter may have changed me, but it did not destroy me. And that is the power I'm taking with me into the new year. Writing this took everything in me. I have never told this whole story in this way from beginning to end. Not out loud, not publicly, not even privately. So thank you. Thank you to every single person who supported me through this nightmare chapter of my life. I truly would not be here without you. I love you all very much. Until the next episode, stay familiar.